Greetings all, welcome back to another session here of English Grammar. Today we're going to be looking at modal auxiliaries, or modals, or auxiliaries, depending on how you grew up. So today we're going to be looking at how to use these, how to place them, and more importantly, how to find the problems and errors that students, typical second language learners, are going to run across. We'll look at the form of the modals, we'll look at modals and phrasal verbs, or auxiliaries. We'll also look at the meaning of modals and their use. Okay. It's important to remember some of the historical background of the modal system that we have in the English language. A lot of it can be traced back to older Germanic words. So, for example, can comes from Konen or Kan in the Dutch. And you can see this list here. This list actually comes from Wikipedia. So you can see some more of this if you're interested in going to look up modals on Wikipedia. But it's interesting to note that we have this background, and we've assumed some of these things, and they've been brought into the English language, and that's, of course, some of the problems that we're going to have because of it. They have an impact on verbs when you're using those. So, for example, if you're using a modal, your verb is generally timeless and personless, right? For example, she walks, and then she can walk. Again, we have got no time in the main verb anymore, no person in the main verb. It would be past tense. We could say she walked, or we could say she could walk, and could being, of course, the past tense of can. So modals affect main verbs, right? They can have multiple meanings as well. They can have social meanings as far as politeness or distance, and also other meanings related to the verb in a more practical sense, or linguistic sense, I guess. So one of the problems that students are going to have is they're going to have difficulty with the impact on the main verb. They're going to have some problems with the possibility of, the modal taking over the job of the main verb sometimes. And then lastly, if their language has modals, it might be easier for them. If their language doesn't have modals, it might be more difficult for them. Those are just some things that you're going to run into as you're doing this. Taking a look at some of the modals that we're looking at, and what the book calls phrasal modals. We have words like can. We also have be able to. And they're similar, but not exact. We have would and shall, and we have be going to. We have must, again, it's one word, and then have to, or have got to. So you see there's this type where you have one word on the modal side, and then you've got the multiple words for the other side. Now, I typically put them all together. I don't separate them. They both mean the same thing, although there are times when you use one as opposed to another. When I'm teaching, I typically put all these together and just call them modals. I don't let my students know the differences. Okay, some of the things that we'll look at here. The traditional teaching method for teaching modals is just to give a list to summarize, here are all the capabilities. A newer method, and as Larson Freeman and Sels Murcia try to describe, they have a new method which talks about teaching both the logical or the probability type of usage and the social interaction. In other words, the politeness and the practical aspects that they're trying to teach at the same time, so that students realize these words, okay, these structure words have multiple possible meanings within the sentences. So, for example, we have things like certainty. Someone was here. It could be. It may be. It must be. It will be. And that's all with regard to levels of certainty, right? Someone was looking for you. It could have been. It might have been. Okay, we're all talking about levels of possibility. It must have been. You're more certain that something has actually happened, right? Degrees of prediction, okay? Who will win the race? Well, it might, may, might, can, could, right? All of these again, but we're talking about the probability of a degree of certainty again, right? We have necessity. I must go. I have to go, okay? So we have multiple meanings for a lot of these words, and it's all going to play, in fact, within the context and also with time. Again, we look at some of these social functions. These are different from the ones we looked at before, which were the practical. So, for example, someone says, can you turn the lights on? Can you turn on the lights for the children? Can you? Could you? Okay, so both of these I use in present time. Can you turn on the lights? Could you turn on the lights Could being more polite form of the request, right? Will and would. Would is going to be past tense, but I could use it as a polite form. Will you turn on the lights? Would you turn on the lights? Okay, so it's the same type of thing. I can use all of these here, but it's referring to greater levels of politeness, or in some cultures, distance from the person that you don't know as well. The less you know someone, the more polite you are apt to be. Same thing is going to go on for permission. Can I take your coat? May I take your coat? Might I take your coat? Okay, and we got levels of politeness here when we're making a request, right? But we're still asking for permission. But again, different levels here. So now we have can that can be, talking about an ability, but it's also a type of politeness in a general request or more of a specific request. And I can also be polite in just asking a question. Can I speak with you? May I speak with you? Right? Might I speak with you? And you're talking about levels of politeness there, right? Same thing as if I'm asking for information. If I'm asking for that you would do something, right? Could you do this for me? Will you? Might you? Again, levels of politeness that are involved here. It is interesting when you look at some of the negative. Got some different sentences that you'll see here. Won't you please sit down? Okay, that's a polite request. Okay, won't you please sit down? You're trying to be nice and cordial with that person. But I can change things around, and it's no longer a nice thing. You'll be able to see this a little later on here. Can Janice and I not sit near the heater? Okay, so that's a request that's negative, but it changes the meaning depending on where it is. Can Janice and I not sit near the heater? Okay, so we've got that negative in there. Same thing with can Janice and I sit near the heater? Right? I'm sorry, can't Janice and I sit near the heater? Okay, we've got some implied differences. Okay, I just moved not to the front, and the implied differences are there, right? One is that I want to sit near them. The other is that I don't want to sit near them. The first one is a polite request. The second one is kind of a complaint, kind of a whiny type of thing. Okay, all because of where the negative is placed. So you need to be careful when you're teaching how the placement of the negative is going to change the meaning with the modals. Giving advice, right? You should stop smoking. I'm sorry, you should stop working at that company. You ought to stop working. You have to stop working. Okay? Again, this is levels of intensity, I guess you should say here. Levels of, of your demand. The strength of your advice is going to change based on the modal that you're using. Some other meanings that you might want to possibly use. One is that I can talk about using can with regard to ability. I can say hello in 7 languages. I am able to say hello in 7 languages. I can do both, right? I can say we can rebuild him, right? I can probably say we can rebuild him is a little different than we are able to rebuild him. Can having more of a positive, I can do this. I've got this. I'm under control type of thing. That would be possibility, right? And I mean, I can also put is able to in possibility, but it's more difficult to do. Desire, right? I would like to travel to Asia. Would you like to dance? Okay. Would you like is sort of a desire. If she made lunches for you, you could save money. Okay, and here we have could in an unreal conditional, unreal present conditional. If she made lunch for you, you could save money. The implication, of course, is that she doesn't make lunches for you, so you're not saving money. But here's where I'm going to have could. Normally, as I said before, if I want to be teaching conditional sentences, I'm going to do them all at once or closer together. I'm not going to teach them with modals. Consider it a separate structure. And it is easier to teach that way, in my opinion. Okay, did you want something else? Here I'm using do, the paraphrastic do here. I don't know why that's here. Made a mistake. Let's move on to the use of modals again here. The difference again between can versus to be able to. Again, there are a variety of reasons that you can do this. You see that some of them line up. We've got possibility, we've got willingness. Requests are probably, I can do it, or can you do this? Can you do me a favor, right? You wouldn't say, would you be able to do me a favor? Normally you would say, can you do me a favor, right? It's not asking about your willingness. It's not asking about your ability. It's asking about your willingness, right? Be able to is oftentimes used in more polite settings. It's more formal at times. Not always, but more formal. So there's a distinction between these that, again, your students are going to run into as far as the difficulty. The use of shall is also going to be used. And shall is generally used in more restricted areas. Will is the more common phrase that's used, at least in American English. Shall is going to be more polite. It's going to be more narrow. It's going to be a promise. I shall return, as opposed to I will return. Yes, I can say that, but shall is more emphatic, more emotional, right? That's involved there. Shall and will, and should, will being less polite, right? And there's more of a command that's involved with will. I'm using it in a question. I often will use will over shall as well, right? Will you sit down, as opposed to shall you sit down. If I say shall, it would probably be shall we sit down. So there's differences between them, right? Let's take a look at as well between will and be going to, right? I will go. A willingness, right? I will get the door. Okay, I will answer it. I'm willing to do that. I wouldn't say, okay, I'm going to answer it. Okay, you're talking about willingness. You're using the word will. If you're talking about a past planning future event, like I'm going to Hawaii next month. I planned in the past. I'm going to do in the future. I'm going to use be going to. Okay, if it's a promise, I'm going to use will. I will marry you. I will return, right? Again, I'm wanting to make a promise. Possibility, again, is going to be in will. The other one that I liked was progress, or something that's imminent, right? The storm is coming. Hey, we got to move. The storm is coming. We're not going to say the storm will come in that sentence. So we have a difference between them, and you just need to know what those nuances are and show your students as you're teaching them. With regard to should, ought to, and be supposed to, should is kind of a moral judgment. You should be in class. I'm not mandating that you're in class, but you should be in class, right? That's a moral type of judgment. You ought to be in class is a more strict, a more forceful type of moral judgment, and it kind of implies that you've broken a rule, right? You ought to be in bed. You ought to be. In other words, you're not there, and you've kind of broken the rule type of thing. It's more intense. And then supposed to be is even more intense, right? You're supposed to be somewhere. You've kind of broken a rule in that sense. You're implying a broken rule, a broken belief, something that ought to be, right? Should be, isn't. Okay, so we have just levels of intensity going on here with the use of these modals. And we've got must and have to and have got to. Again, I would just refer to these as levels of intensity. There are some people who say these two are the same. No big deal. This one is, I would assume, going to be a little bit different. But there are others who say all three of these are different. The nice thing about teaching these is that you'll teach them in, a sequence, and then you'll say, some people will say maybe some of these are the same or they're not the same. And when you look at the world Englishes, if you're teaching ESL, if you're here in the United States, okay, then you can probably say these are generally the same, or have to might be a little stronger than must. But you go to other places in the world and you'll see that there's a strict progression, or that they're all the same, and so it's going to be different. Difference between used to and be used to. Used to is followed by an infinitive, right? I used to drive. I used to eat bananas, okay? But be used to is going to have have a gerund. I used to be used to driving. I am used to driving at night, right? Used to driving at night, okay? I've become acclimated to, in other words, right? I've become acclimated to, whereas used to means I did something in the past, but I don't do it now, right? Okay, so the different meaning there. I would simply look at these as two different modals with different meanings. You have to understand those constructions, okay? That's all I have here, but I did want to show you that there are some other things that you can be looking at. Here I found online something called an overview of modals. So you can look at these and say, here are some things that you could be teaching as far as showing your students. Okay, here's can, and here are some of the functionalities of can. I just found this online. Somewhere I can show you where this is, but I mean, this is a nice little way of showing what modals are. Here's their functions, right? And then some of these functions are to show politeness, and some of them are just to show possibility or impossibility or certainty, right? Right, and so they've mixed these together. Here's politeness, right? But here's the possibility or impossibility: may, might, should, ought to, right? This is the type of list that I think would be more beneficial to you as an ESL teacher. You ought to know what these are, recognize that they impact the main verb by getting rid of person and time. Sometimes these verbs will take on person or time, or these modals will take on person and time, but the main verb then loses them. They get stripped of them. And so here's a nice little 2-bit list. A 2-page list where you can have these quick way of showing students what these are, examples of how to use them. These I would recommend. The slides that we were looking at earlier, these slides, they do an okay job of trying to explain things, but I think a better way of looking at these is that we've got several sets of modals. We can look at all the modals the same. Some have multi-parts, some are single part, what they would call phrasal modals, and just regular modals. I just throw them all together. That's the way I would do that. Okay, another thing I wanted to show you is that there are places online, and we're looking right here now, places online where you can get exercises. And I just happened to run across these, and here's an exercise where students have to put in the proper modals, and then they can check them down here at the bottom, which is a pretty nice little thing to do. And I'm assuming that those of you who are looking at this know what software created this page, right? So, for example, Ted's flight from Amsterdam took them more than 11 hours. He blank be exhausted, right? I would probably put in here, he must be exhausted. I can't drag this, so I have to type this in here, right? He must be exhausted. He blank prefer to stay, right? He might prefer to stay. Okay, and then I can go down to the bottom here and check the answers and see how many I got right. Okay, some of your answers are incorrect. Okay, so I can come on up here. Oh, so I got these two correct, so they were disappeared. They were melded into the text, so I don't have to worry about those again. But here's some great activities. They are 4 modals, and there are a lot of them out there that you can have your students do as sort of extra work if you're interested. And this, of course, is after you go through the process of trying to show them, you know, some of the meanings that are here and the problems that may ensue, and also by showing them an overview list. All right? I do hope this was helpful to you. Excuse me. If you do have any questions, please let me know. If not,